Alright, we're back. We're talking FF7 Rebirth. We have a new interview with the devs with Anime News Network. There's some interesting bits from this. They talk about like the ending of Rebirth, of course, the very classic thing that we talk about in every goddamn interview. The people asking the questions also ask some pretty good questions, you know, things that are we would want a really good answer for. The devs can't give good answers because we're still pretty early into the development of Part 3. But also there's one particular thing coming from this that's being talked about a decent amount, and it's like Hamaguchi and them like referring to the other worlds and stuff within the planet as timelines. So let's hop right into it. What was the impetus for automating the weapon skill system as opposed to how it was used in Remake? Endo says, looking into Remake, the growth mechanics were fewer in terms of the player choosing the passive skill for the characters and such. But then in Rebirth, this was increased to including the synergy mechanic, as we touched on, as well as the affinity between the characters impacting their abilities and skills and as part of the overall growth mechanics. So all of these were added as new growth mechanics for Rebirth. The underlying mindset in consolidating these systems is when I considered adding all of these individual systems to the title. I thought this would require the players to be more mindful and take time and care to look into each of them. And when thinking of that, I thought the best way would be to consolidate these into one skill tree where all these new changes can be observed through this skill tree. I'm so happy that you're asking me this. It's a pretty niche question. So there's not like a whole lot to say from that specific like question and answer, but I've said this before on the channel, like I personally preferred Remake's like upgrade system with like the cores and shit for the weapons. Something about that was more appealing to me. I think part of that comes down to like with Remake, you could get every ability eventually, right? Obviously you had to do hard mode and get the manuscripts and stuff to be able to max everybody's weapons or whatever, but you could inevitably unlock everything. Whereas with Rebirth, when you upgrade your weapons or whatever, you got to pick. You only have like so many slots for abilities to pick, right? So it feels like you're missing out on stuff. But kind of in defense of Rebirth, it's kind of what I asked for. You know, I remember like post-Remake talking about wanting like choices and like loadouts and have to like pick between abilities as opposed to getting them all. So I'm kind of like 50-50 these days. I've kind of grown to appreciate Rebirth's system a little bit more as time's gone on. Not that I like it more than Remakes. It's not exactly what I wanted, but it is sort of what I asked for. It is kind of weird though that you introduce the weapon core system into Remake and then completely go a different route with the sequel. It's not unheard of for RPGs to do that, but it wasn't like a unique system. It's not too different than like the Crystarium from 13 or the Sphere Grid from 10 or even like the license board from 12 or whatever, right? It's not like a super unique system with the weapon cores, but it was still kind of cool. It was visually cool too, whereas I think the one in Rebirth is not like visually, aesthetically pleasing, but it's just like kind of a standard upgrade system you see in other RPGs as well. Moving on, I have a question for Kitase-san as well. With reports that the Remake game sales underperformed, are there plans to change the console exclusivity window for the next installment of Final Fantasy VII Remake Trilogy? Regarding the strategy of the console release, there's sort of nothing we can comment on regarding that. But overall, we are looking forward to more players enjoying and playing this title, so we wish for that to happen. So that's obviously an example of like a really good question that they can't necessarily give us an answer to, because they can't obviously talk about like the exclusivity window of the third game. Like we're, again, early into development, they can't really talk on that shit. It is kind of interesting to see what they're going to do for Rebirth. It's something we talked about a little bit here on the channel. When they're going to do like the PC release of it versus how it was handled with like Remake, but also with like Final Fantasy 16. In those cases, it took the games more than a year to come to PC, and if we're talking specifically Steam, it took Remake more than 2 years to get there, right? Like a year and 8 months to come to Epic. And we had like a really short exclusivity window for Rebirth compared to Remake. Remake was, supposed to be a year. It obviously got extended and stuff like that. But with Rebirth, it was supposed to have ended in May of this year. So we're looking like a 3-month exclusivity window, and obviously nothing's come of that as of right now. But it's like, there's like an arbitrary like time frames, it seems like every time. I believe FF16's was like the end of last year, like December 2023, right? But we didn't get anything for the PC release until like literally last month, I think August, right? So like it took more than a full year before they actually even fully announced like it's coming to PC and here's the release window. In the May version of the Inside Square Enix video, Endo-san stated he wanted to give the player even more freedom in the third installment. Can you share some of the ideas the staff are implementing to do this? While I'm unable to comment on granular details of that right at this moment, I believe that instead of the developers or the creators dictating how the player should play along a pre-planned path, so to speak, it's better to allow more freedom in the user's choice to be able to play in their own way that they wish to. While naturally there are challenges to actually realizing that, when you go into making that a reality, my thoughts are also that for the Final Fantasy series to continue to reinvent itself, to revitalize itself, and stay fresh to our players, this type of constant evolution is necessary in terms of the battle elements as well. So those are the underlying thoughts I had while making that comment. So this is something we've heard before, maybe from Endo as well, in like a different interview or something, where they want the players to have more freedom in the next game. It's exciting. I don't know how they're going to do it exactly, because obviously with like Final Fantasy games, at least with all the numbered entries that's not an MMO, they're very like kind of linear, kind of story driven. Obviously like Rebirth had a lot to do. When you get to new regions, there's side questing, mini games, all kinds of things to do, but ultimately you just go from point A to point B, right? That's all you can do. You can't like trail off and go do other shit necessarily. Other than like the Highwind, obviously that's going to offer some level of freedom, but I don't know when we're going to get that for sure with like the third game, right? Because we get it a little bit into Disc 2 or whatever. But once you get to Highwind, like, the goal is to go to Mideel and like, go find Cloud and stuff, right? That's what you're supposed to do. But maybe once you get to Highwind, you can kind of just go wherever you want to. But we already sort of had that level of freedom with Rebirth, right? Because you can backtrack at like any point for the most part, other than like story-locked sections. You can always backtrack and fast travel to like another region and go do like side quests and mini games and shit, right? So I don't know what you do differently in the third game to offer more freedom. Maybe you guys have ideas. Cutscene director Hidekazu Miyake mentioned that Cloud's big dance number in Remake was the most ambitious and challenging. Was Aerith's performance of No Promises to Keep somewhat difficult to realize? Is there another cinematic sequence in Rebirth that takes the crown for the greatest challenge? So actually, the most difficult scene in Rebirth, I believe, was Rufus's inauguration parade. I'll go into why. First, we had to look for a person that understands parade formations. Someone with that experience was very rare to find. Then we had to find actors who could perform these various sequences. So with both of these requirements, we had to look and have all of them before we started motion capture. It took a while to find these people. An interesting story I'd like to share is that in that scene, all the soldiers, including Cloud, have guns in their hands while they're doing the parade. To mimic this, we created real gun models for all the actors to hold while doing the sequence. But then what happened is the gun models we made were so heavy and it was impossible to move, trolling around and doing all those motions. So it became a problem. In the end, even though they made those models, they used umbrellas. So I thought that was a kind of funny story, something I personally hadn't heard before. Some little like behind the scenes details and shit like that. They had these heavy ass gun models, couldn't use them, had to use umbrellas. It makes me think back to an image we got quite a while ago of the Tifa and Cloud mocap actors taking a picture together, and one of them sitting on like a beach chair with an umbrella. For the longest time, we always speculated that that picture was in regards to Costa del Sol. Most likely it is, because there is the moment in Rebirth where Cloud has the umbrella as like a weapon. Kind of a callback to Crisis Core where Zack uses the umbrella as a weapon, right? The thing is, like, he does mocap for Cloud, she does mocap for Tifa, but I believe she does mocap for Cloud in the fighting sequences, if I'm not mistaken. The fact that he's holding the umbrella makes me think of the marching scene potentially, just because I could see them like hiring people to do like the parade shit, the marching stuff, like other people to do mocap shit. But I could still see them having like the Cloud mocap actor still doing it, because he could obviously do it. He's a professional mocap guy. They then followed up with, do you know approximately how many motion capture actors they needed to get for that scene, since a parade is usually so many people? We had around 30 to 40 soldiers in the parade within the game. We can't fit all those people in a mocap studio. So we had a group of 6 people that we would film in various areas doing the routine, and then we would put those all together through CG. So again, another kind of behind the scenes development detail. Kind of cool, nothing too crazy from that. Fans have been trying to decode the secrets of the timeline based on the variations of Stamp the Shinner Dog. Can you confirm if there's anything more to these different stamps? So when a player goes through playing Remake and Rebirth, it does come to a point where one can have many conjectures about what this means. The reason we include the different stamps was to signal the different layers and different timelines within this world. So that acts as a mark for the player to see and say, oh, what's that? So these are shown in each timeline. We would see a stamp like on a bag of sweets, or it's like a doll in a gift shop. They're put in as little markers or Easter eggs. So as I mentioned previously, this is one of the major talking points from this interview. The use of the word timeline from one of the guy asking the question, but also like Hamaguchi. I don't know if it's like a translation thing either. It's the person's using the word timeline, so I don't know if like Hamaguchi's also using the word timeline to like answer the question that used the word timeline. I don't know entirely. I don't go down this rabbit hole too much. We've been talking about timeline shit for the remake project for fucking ever, but obviously this like piqued a lot of people's interest that, Hamaguchi referred to the other worlds as timelines, or also layers. And even if we want to call them timelines, is it timelines in the multiverse sense? Like, we were told that these worlds are inside the planet, but exactly how does all that work? That's something that probably has to be answered with the third game, right? Because even if they are considered timelines, different timelines, are they tangible real worlds? I don't entirely know. We did see Cloud, take the white materia from one timeline to the next, so maybe they are. I don't know exactly. And in that sense, maybe, technically people that are in these other worlds are alive, so maybe Aerith is technically alive in one of these other timelines. Who the fuck knows anymore? Who cares? What is the wildest fan theory you've seen about the trilogy so far? Everyone laughs. Hamaguchi says, after the panel yesterday, we were chatting with the voice actors over dinner, and this exact topic came up, funnily enough. We're talking about Chadley, which is that character who supports Cloud in Rebirth. We're talking about how, like, some people think that he's actually evil and will turn out to be the last boss in the final title. We were cracking up about that. So this one I thought was kind of funny, but also a little bit weird, because I don't know if Hamaguchi's either being misquoted or if he's misheard the theory. Like, I think I've heard a little bit of jokes about, Chadley being the final boss, but, like, the serious discussions about it are more so that he's like collecting data for Hojo, that he'd be a fight we do in the third game, more than like the super boss of the game, right? We've spent like 2 or 3 games gathering all this detail for Chadley, and then we gotta fight him. He has like everything we've ever done, right? Collected. He'd be probably the super boss of the game. So I don't think anybody realistically thinks that he would be like the final boss of the game, because that's obviously gonna be Sephiroth. More than likely, save for Sephiroth, right? And maybe like a 1-on-1 fight with Cloud after that, like they did in the original game. But I don't think anybody's like really expecting like before we roll credits, we're fighting fucking Chadley. That's the actual boss of the game. Also, I don't think it's a far-fetched idea. I mean, there's got to be some sort of payoff to Chadley, right? What does that pay off in the third game? Like, what happens at the end of the story for Chadley? What does he go to do? Does he go to be free? He's a free android. He can go do his own shit or whatever. Cyborg, whatever the fuck he is. I think it makes a little bit of sense that we'd potentially fight him, especially with his connection to Hojo. Even if it's not, like, his intention. Maybe Hojo learns about Chadley in the third game and, like, hacks him and then we gotta fight him or something. I don't know. I think it'd be kind of rewarding to have a Chadley fight in the third game just because he was kind of fucking annoying in Rebirth. I liked him in Remake. Too much Chadley in Rebirth. So if you let us kick the little twink's ass in the third game, that'd be pretty nice. I'd appreciate that. Kitase's response to the theory question is, I don't know if this is something unexpected or anything. I guess there's not really a specific thing or theory that I can comment on right now. But we do hear a lot of players, different conjectures, saying, oh, how much will this story change from the original? I do want to comment that I don't think that's how it will be. We've always kept the original in mind, and I don't think it's going to be a storyline that will betray the fans of the original game. But also at the same time, it's been 27 years since the release of the original Final Fantasy VII. There are these things that we feel we can only do now in the remake project that can bring a new happiness, a new sort of feeling and satisfaction to the players playing this game now 27 years later. What this will entail exactly is something we hope players will experience soon. So this is another kind of like popular thing coming from this interview is, the devs confirming that they're not betraying the original FF7. We're still following the FF7 story. Nothing's changed, and this isn't a sequel. That whole discussion we've been having for a couple years now. It's a little contradictory. I mean, because they even go on to talk about how, they want there to be like theory crafting shit, the discussion amongst the fans at the end of Rebirth because of the kind of ambiguous ending. But it's like, well, if we're following FF7, then there's no speculation. There's no theory crafting. The only way that there is actual discussion to be had is if we're doing new shit. Also, like, if we're not adding new shit, expanding the lore, adding stuff to it, potential of, like, characters' fates being different, then it's like, what was the point of it all? What's the point of Remake? The whole story of Remake was breaking away from Destiny, and then we get to, like, Rebirth, and we don't really do that type of shit too much anymore, and then we get to the end, and it's like, is she alive or is she dead? Like, that's kind of all it is, and it's like, well, if we're fucking following FF7, she's dead. So here we are with the last question we're going to talk about for this video. The end of Rebirth makes one of the most famous cutscenes in video game history for new audiences. Some reactions post-game included confusion over how to interpret the new development of the scene. What reaction was the staff hoping to garner from players? What message did you want? Or do you have a comment for players who feel this new version of events is confusing or unsatisfying? Hamaguchi says, first, I think this is a very good question. They say, oh, thank you. Hamaguchi's answer is, so when I was playtesting the game and went through run-throughs countless numbers of times, I thought the players who were going to play Rebirth were going to have various perspectives and thoughts about the ending. We'd already announced from the beginning that this remake series would be a trilogy, which isn't necessarily true. We didn't know until 2022 that it was going to be a trilogy. So when we're considering releasing 3 titles, of course there will be some time between releasing 1 to 2 and 2 to 3. Also discussed how we want the community to interact while we're waiting for that next installment. Kitase-san and I were also discussing this, but we thought it's very enjoyable for the community to have something very worthy of intense discussion, like what is really going on here. That was something we wanted and expected going into creating this scene. In terms of the experience we anticipated and also desired, I think we are satisfied in that there are both negative and positive reactions to this scene. So this is another one that's, kind of being talked about from this interview. And it's a lot of people that, I guess maybe don't know that this isn't really a new thing. Because if they came up with my channel where we look at, pretty much every interview that's out there, like they talked about this before. They wanted discussion to be had, at the end of Rebirth going into the third game. They want the community talking and speculating on what might be happening at the end of Rebirth while they're making the third game, right? I don't know. I couldn't point exactly to where they've said this before because we talk about so many goddamn interviews on the channel. But it's not new in terms of, like, us hearing that from the devs. That said, it's kind of ridiculous to hear, though, right? Because, like, that's the reason they went with the ending that they did, where there's, like, this ambiguity sort of thing where it's like we're jumping between, like, Aerith for sure dead because we're seeing blood all over the ending sequence and everybody all sad and depressed and shit. Then you, like, jump into Cloud talking to her and stuff. So there's that level of attempted ambiguity, but not really. And kind of hopping back to, like, the previous question answer that we did, like, what's the point of the discussion if we're just following FF7? Because she's dead, right? Like, Zack's dead. If we're just doing FF7 again, if we're not changing anything, if we're not betraying the original story, they're both still dead. So there's nothing to really talk about. There's no, like, oh, is he alive? Is she fully dead? Is she alive in a different timeline? And if you're even alive in a different timeline, what does that mean? Because what are these other timelines, right? So it's like, I don't know, dude. And as we get to, like, Kitase's answer here after this question, he just further confirms Aerith is dead. So again, like, what is the point of this, like, need for discussion from the fans if you're also just confirming that she's dead? It's also not the first time he's done that in interviews. And Kitase says, also to add to this and offer an alternate perspective, when discussing the scenario with Nomura and Ojima, we're also talking about how in the original, it's showing Cloud's perspective, his feeling of immense loss of losing someone that you love and having this hole in your heart. When considering how to depict this in the remake series, we also thought about not only expressing this loss as someone who means so much to you, but also this sense of a person experiencing loss, being unable to force yourself to forget this person, almost like in an inability to accept it, struggling with the possibility of losing someone. So that was something we wanted to show in Rebirth. So we can actually stop right there for a second, just because that's Kitase confirming that she's dead, right? We've heard this before in other interviews, But him talking about how Cloud's like unable to force himself to forget somebody that he lost, right? He's unable to accept the fact that he's lost somebody. Like, it's there, it's very fucking blatant in the game, but there's still people that want to argue. But here it is, Kitase, Yoshinori Kitase, telling you that she's fucking dead. Is she in a different timeline and whatever's going on there? Maybe, who cares? But in this timeline, the main timeline, whatever you want to call this shit, she's fucking dead. If that couldn't be more fucking obvious from the goddamn blood on Sephiroth's sword. I get a little bit of heat about this just because, like, for me, like, the ending of Rebirth is very blatant, other than the different world stuff. Like, that's obviously where we have, like, questions. But, like, what's going on at the end of the game? Obviously, the character's mourning, sitting in front of the body of water. Like, it's pretty clear that the same shit that happened in the original FF7 happened in Rebirth, too. People still want to argue, like, she's alive. And it's like, dude. Like, not alive in different worlds. Like, she's still alive. Though nobody else ever acknowledges her at the end of the game. Kitase further goes on to say, regarding the original, its first disc ends with that huge loss, and I recall some people not wanting to continue playing and changing over to disc 2 because they didn't want to play anymore because of that. It's such a huge feeling of loss and despair, but I do think there's a synchronization of feelings between the players and Cloud struggling with how do I deal with this feeling. The feeling of loss and how a person struggled to take that on was happening. We imagine the players of Rebirth would also have that synchronous feeling. Here's the thing, too. When I hear Kitase say that, it makes me think they didn't commit fully to her death because of people maybe not wanting to play the third game, right? He says that himself. Like, people that finished Disc 1, there's certain people who didn't even want to play Disc 2 because they were just so sad or upset or whatever because of Aerith's death. They didn't even want to continue playing the game. So it almost feels like, to me, like they want to fully commit. They want to pull the trigger on Aerith's death, like fully show that she dies so that people would buy and play the third game. That's the vibe I get from that. Alongside, of course, what Hamaguchi said, where they wanted people talking about, you know, what happened at the end of the game going into the third game. From a lot of the discussion I've seen online, I think it's mostly unanimous that a lot of people weren't, like, super happy with the ending. There's obviously people who were affected by it. It was sad for them, whatever. But it's like, it's what they handled the best. Like, you go back to the original FF7, that is, like, the most iconic character death in all of video games. And I feel like they tarnished it a bit with Rebirth because they didn't want to, like, fully show that shit, right? This whole, like, I can understand, like, the perspective of Cloud not wanting to accept her death. Like, I totally understand that idea or that concept. I just didn't like the way they did it, personally. There's other things that they changed throughout, like Rebirth and stuff, that I wasn't the biggest fan of, like the dying segment and shit. But I think, like, Aerith's death is one thing they shouldn't have, like, even touched at all. Like, I think they should have just let it ride like it did in the original. Because they did that shit. You do see, like, when Cloud's, like, holding Aerith and you see him talking, but you can't hear what he's saying. We've already been told by either Cody Christian in an interview or one of the devs. They say the iconic lines, you know, whenever after Aerith dies, he's talking to Sephiroth about, like, his eyes burning, his mouth is dry, or whatever he says exactly. Like, he's saying those things, again, confirming that she is dead, but they just didn't give that to us. Here's the thing, I love Remake and I love Rebirth. I love Rebirth more than Remake, actually. But there's part of me that wishes, like, if we're just going to do the FF7 story, like, I wish they'd have just kind of did more of that, like a direct remake kind of thing. Maybe incorporating stuff from the compilation, of course, but the whole, like, possibility of things being different, defining fate, I wish that all wasn't here if there's not going to be a payoff to that. Like, if we get to the end of the third game and we're just doing FF7 and there's no payoff to breaking away from destiny and all that other shit, like, why do we do any of that? Like, so I don't know. I don't know if there's going to be a payoff to that. Maybe there'll be something different in the third game, potentially. But as of right now, it just seems like there probably won't be. And it kind of sucks. It means, like, Remake was more or less pointless. We could have just started with Rebirth. My dudes, that'll be pretty much the video. Giving you guys a thick video for this Friday the 13th. Ooh, it's a spooky day. It is hot as hell in here. I've been recording for a while. Sweat my balls off. I'm ready to hop in the shower. I cannot possibly wait for the fall weather. I need it to get colder because holy goddamn shit. But anyways, pass off to you guys. What are your thoughts on what we talked about in this video? A lot of different things. It's a thick video. That's the video. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. Social networks in the description below. Follow me on Twitter, _davidYT. That's it. Bye.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Rogaine, or leave it like Cobain.